Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here this morning. My name is Joanne Crary, and I'm president of Saginaw Future. Veronica Horne is the president of the Saginaw County Chamber of Commerce, and she's also with us today. The two organizations are hosting this workshop this morning. She's going to be introducing the first panel. The Saginaw County Chamber of Commerce and Saginaw Future collaborated together to provide individuals with expertise in various areas of wind energy. SFI and the Chamber have identified wind and solar energy as future economic opportunities. Our mission at Saginaw Future is to advance economic growth, so we believe it's our role to provide information for our local government officials and leaders who are leaders in our community so they're able to make informed decisions. Because we have such a limited amount of time today, we'll not have a formal question and answer session. We've asked the members of each of the panels to stick around after the workshop, and you'll be able to approach them with specific individual questions. Before we begin our panel today, I'd like to introduce State Senator Ken Horne. In 2006, Ken was elected to serve the 94th District in the Michigan House of Representatives. From 2007 to 2012, he represented the cities of Birch Run, Chesaning, Frankenmuth, and St. Charles, in addition to 12 townships in Saginaw County. He served as chairman of the House Energy and Technology Committee at a time when the state adopted the first renewable portfolio standard. In 2014, Ken was elected to serve the 37th District in the Michigan Senate. He represents all of Saginaw County and the western portion of Genesee County. He currently chairs the Senate Economic and Small Business Development Committee, along with two Senate Appropriations Subcommittees, Capital Outlay and Talent and Economic Development, including the MEDC. Senator Horne.
All right, so I was told there was going to be a panel today for this workshop, and I saw 3 chairs sitting down here. Going, if we're not going to be able to even face the audience, this is something a little bit different. And then I saw this microphone sitting up here, and so you gave me a limited amount of time as a politician to talk to the people with a microphone in my hand. So it's great to be here with you. I chair, as was mentioned, the Economic Development Committee for the Senate now. One of our goals in economic development was trying to find the stumbling blocks for economic growth for the state of Michigan. And what we discovered in my first term in 2015 was that we had 3 major stumbling blocks. Economic development, or energy rather, was one of those stumbling blocks. We weren't convinced that we had the capacity to run our businesses in our industrial sector as Michigan grows, as we grow. I mean, right now we're talking about a new Jeep plant down in southeast Michigan, 4,500 employees, the first auto manufacturing plant in 15 years. Michigan is recovering its economy, and so as we grow and as we begin to gain population again, we have to find the balance between, protecting our environment and industrial growth, a growing population. So these are some of the factors that we put into play, and even as early as 2008. So in Public Act 295, we introduced a 10% renewable portfolio. So our RPS, our standard for renewables, was established. We began seeing industrial growth inside of this renewable standard. I just toured the Monroe coal plant, and standing on top of that building, on top of one of the scrubbers, because such a clean plant, and Consumers was doing the same thing up here as well. But from that rooftop, I could look down on Vent Tower, which is the producers of the bases for the wind towers, and these bases are made out of metal, it's steel, thick. they cold roll these turbines. They have to design them so that they taper slightly and all the engineering that goes into that. And I tell you, this is real manufacturing. Because we talked about green manufacturing that was tied to renewables, but this is true. I mean, you got people inside these things, inside these big towers, initially running their beads, they're welding, and the sparks are flying, and it's just a cool thing to watch. And now today we have with the 2016 legislation on energy reform, we have a 15% renewable portfolio. And we're almost there with what we have. But it was enough to say to the kind of the system, we're interested in this. We're interested in wind. We're interested in solar. We're interested in biofuels. We're interested in clean fuels. And so with natural gas being as inexpensive as it is, it makes a terrific base load generation backup to any kind of renewable that we're going to do. Now it comes down to the politics and why we have this workshop here today, is that there are public perceptions about wind turbines and in industrial solar fields. And we want to make sure that the information is out there so that the people in the communities I represent can make informed, good decisions. You want these, you don't want these, but make the decision based on the information that to be true. Whether these turbines are safe or they're not, they cause health issues, they don't. They do provide a strong tax base for every community that they've been in. But maybe the aesthetics aren't, appealing to you. So these are all things to consider. I like the balanced portfolio that we have, and we're going to continue to work on the technologies, the battery storage issues. This is really going to be probably the most important thing that we can add to our system is once we can store energy. And because the sun doesn't shine every day, the wind doesn't blow every day, we know all of this, that we can balance out and bring to the people a good, strong, reliable, affordable energy right to their doors, whether they live in their home or they're running a business or they're running a factory, that they know that when they come in and turn on the lights or turn on the machinery, that electricity is always going to be there for them. So with that, I thank Saginaw Future and Saginaw Chamber for hosting this workshop and inviting me to kind of sit in and watch the proceedings. Thanks all.
Well, thanks so much, Senator. Economic development and energy are so closely aligned, and we certainly appreciate your leadership and your vision for Michigan in these matters. Okay, well, we're going to start the panels. There's a couple seats open up here for people that are standing in the back. Please feel free to join us. Veronica Horne is President and CEO of the Saginaw County Chamber of Commerce, and she's going to introduce and moderate the panel. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Senator Horne, for coming today. And I think it goes without saying, wow, I'm going to talk about energy, huh? It goes without saying that we appreciate your leadership, not just on energy, but for our entire region. So I am Veronica Horne, President of the Saginaw County Chamber of Commerce, and I'd personally like to welcome everyone and thank you for attending today's educational session on wind farm projects. As Joanne mentioned, both Saginaw Future and the Saginaw County Chamber of Commerce feel that it's beneficial to the community to advance accurate scientific information about projects that affect our region, no matter what it is. Today, we're pleased to bring in some experts on the health aspects of wind development. To respect your time, each of our presenters' bios are printed in your programs. These are esteemed scientists that'll be presenting today. So now let's begin. First of all, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Ellenbogen. Jeff, Jeff, I'm going to just leave that there and let you. That's perfect. It's kind of sliding. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning, folks. Great to be with you. My name is Jeff Ellenbogen. I'm a physician and a researcher, and I'm here from Baltimore, Maryland. Great to be with you. I'm here to talk about the potential health effects of wind turbines, and I'm not here to talk about energy policy or my opinions about what's good or not. I feel really strongly that that's for you and your community to decide. I'm really just here to echo what Senator Horne just said, which is to try to convey information that you can make decisions for yourself. Let's talk about the giant elephant in the room, my finger. Now, I don't know if anyone has gone through with a splint holding your middle finger up. It is definitely not the way to go. I'm a pretty nice person, but somehow I've offended a few people along the way. I dropped off my daughter the other day, and I said, well, I'll see you this weekend, sweetie. And she said, well, Daddy, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to give a talk in Indiana and speak with some leaders about wind energy. And she said, well, I want to come. And I said, well, you've got to go to school. I wish you could come. And she said, oh, I want to hear your speech. And she went into the bathroom and got a hairbrush and handed it to me like that and said, I want to hear what it was really cute. And so, I gave her the 10-year-old version, and I said, there's a lot of, there's some people out there, fortunately not that many, who didn't learn to share what they want and hear what other people want and make compromise and make good decisions based on that. And instead, they'll work through fear and misinformation and giving you the wrong facts so that you get scared out of doing something you want to do. If you work with good companies and good technology and have reasonable rules of the road, wind energy is very safe and very protective of human health. How did that go? And she said to me, you're going to offend so many people at your and I said, well, what did I say? It didn't seem so controversial. She said, Daddy, the way you're holding the brush, with the mic, you're giving everybody the finger. So I said, okay, that is it. I saw the stand was here, and I said, I'm in good shape. Now, how do I advance this? I don't have a lot of time, and this is a lot of information. So let me kind of give a high level, and I'm going to stick around later. So if anyone has questions, please let's get into the details of it. The details really, really matter. Okay, so you don't need an outline for such a brief talk, but it's just from me. I guess I would start with why care. Lots of people will answer that in different ways. This is a big topic that has broad application. For me, it's about misinformation. I feel as a physician seeing patients that when someone comes to me and they're convinced, Doc, I've got a brain tumor, start chemotherapy or surgery, set me up for, whoa, let's slow down. What's the problem? Let's go through the details. And I think that when someone has the wrong piece of information, sometimes that can get them down a track that leads them to making decisions or wanting certain outcomes that aren't the best pathway forward. And so for me in this topic, my why do I care is trying to look at Google and see what health impacts are out there and trying to match that to real data, real science, and reality. And so that people can not make decisions from fear. Just a little bit of background about myself. I didn't see what was written in there, but I'll just go for it just so that you sort of know where I'm coming from. I'm a neurologist and a sleep specialist, both of those, and I worked for many years at Mass General Hospital, and then I worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I taught neuroscience at Harvard for many years, and so I had a good time with that. Best situation for the local crowd is I went to University of Michigan. Sorry, any MSU people or Ohio State people out there. So yeah, good. And then Tufts, and then Penn and Harvard, and yada yada yada. But I care a great deal about the health implications of noise, and that's been my research platform for quite some time, is looking at the interface of signals with the brain and with human physiology to optimize human health and well-being. And so that's kind of my reason to be and my personal passion, and hopefully that will convey through here. I do have some specific experience with wind that I think is relevant. Two things come to mind immediately. One is that in 2011, I was asked by the commissioners of, I was living in Massachusetts at the time, I was asked by the commissioners for the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Public Health to come join a 7-member committee that was going to evaluate the potential health impacts of wind on humans. What the commissioners wanted was, they said, well, Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts is going to make a big push for wind energy, but before we do that, we want to know what we're getting ourselves into. So we brought together a group of people, and we went over paper after paper for an entire year of deliberating it. It was both fun and incredibly painful. It was a lot of detail. We came out with a report. It's sometimes called the Massachusetts study, but it's a report. It's not a new research study. It's an evaluation of the existing research, the state of the science. And there were a couple of really big, high-level points that came out of it. First of all, the main point that we made, and this is now back in 2012, was that adverse health outcomes, claims about adverse health outcomes based on wind energy are not based on scientific or medical literature. There's no basis for that, and so people that are making that claim are not pointing to scientific or medical literature, and certainly not anything of good quality. We looked very carefully at something called wind turbine syndrome, which is out there, and it's one of the prominent things that shows up when you look at this. There is no such thing as wind turbine syndrome. We looked at, there's some scientists in Portugal that talk about Vibrio acoustic disease. There is no such thing as Vibrio acoustic disease. It just doesn't exist. It's not a real thing, and so on. We said if you make the turbines loud enough and you bring them close enough to people, it's going to start waking people up. It's going to annoy people that don't like them. But we noted that it's going to annoy people more if they feel that the turbine is affecting their health and safety, and who can blame them for that feeling? So the key is getting information right to help to reduce the feeling of annoyance that some people have from wind turbines, and to cite them in a reasonable way so that they don't wake people up. We didn't have a threshold at that time. We didn't know how to draw a line in the sand. But we knew if you got very loud, you're going to wake people up. And so over a range of other health effects, cardiovascular disease, headaches, hearing loss, you name it, there's just no basis for the fact that a wind turbine would cause those kinds of health problems. Okay, that was 2012. I got a lot of hate mail from that, and as you can imagine, and I went through it. I took it very seriously. You know, the last thing that I want to do, the last thing anybody here wants to do, is not have compassion or concern for anyone. And so getting an email saying, how can you promise me that my child is not going to develop neuropathy because of the wind turbine that you said was okay, those are challenging emails to get. But fortunately, as time has gone on, those kinds of interactions that I've had with people, which often end in a, oh, okay, I didn't realize that that was just something made up on a website. More importantly than that, I'm going to come to this, I want to be mindful of my time. There has been some new scientific literature, the broadest and most comprehensive of which comes out of Canada. I'll colloquially call the Health Canada study, which I'll talk about in just a minute, that gave a lot of relief and a lot of data to support what we probably already knew. All right, boy, who writes these slides? That's perfect. Okay, so let me just talk about that, and then I'm going to come back to my personal experience with patients who have been near wind turbines who have raised concern about their own health. Health Canada is a study, again, the broadest, most comprehensive, and the only study that has looked at actual physiology of people. This is 1,200 some odd people in Prince Edward Island and Ontario. It's an enormous study. These are sited turbines. So this is a real house and a real turbine. And they asked a series of questions, numerous publications, surveys about cardiovascular disease, stress, headache, and so forth. And they matched this is the really great part, they matched the questionnaires that they were giving to people to actual physiological measurements. They measured the physiology of sleep. They measured the physiology of stress by checking cortisol levels. They measured cardiovascular health by measuring blood pressure, heart rate, and so forth, of real people living near real turbines that are spinning. And they measured the sound. And then they modeled the sound to each and every one of those houses. And they looked at the spread of them. So people that didn't have any reasonable noise exposure whatsoever, like I think it was less than 20 or 25 dBA, versus people all the way up to 46 dBA. That was the highest noise that they measured. It's not a line in the sand necessarily, but that's the loudest noise that they experienced in those regions. And they compared how people were doing their health in that high category to how the people were doing the health in the low category. Remembering that insomnia and hypertension and other diseases are common in the general population. The question is, does a wind turbine influence those things? And the answer was a blunt no. On all of the measures, the measures of questionnaires, stress, cardiovascular disease, sleep, and a broader range of medical health questions, there was not a greater risk or greater rate, a greater amount of those problems in the higher noise, the higher noise categories, the people near turbines. Similarly, for the physiological measures, cortisol level for stress, blood pressure and heart rate for stress, and cardiovascular disease, sleep physiology, so forth. You get the kind of where I'm going with it. No element of that correlated to higher noise exposure closer to wind turbines. And so this is a really bold piece of information because there's something kind of intuitive about that, but it's really important to know that when someone says wind turbines are going to cause, and they list insomnia and heart attacks and stroke and diabetes, I think you have now not only a sense of intuition that won't happen, but also a piece of information that's really important. To remind you what I said to my daughter, which is, they have to be cited at reasonable levels, but I think working with a reputable company and a reasonable citing is routine nowadays, and I don't think you'll run into any trouble there. I want to, I don't know how much time I have. Do I have 2 minutes left? I have 10 minutes. Senator, do you want to take some of my, cede my time to I won't take the whole 10 minutes. We have a lot to cover, and but I do want to share some actual experiences with actual people, so you kind of see how I got a little bit of passion about this topic as a physician. Here's a gentleman in his 50s, an industrial designer, who is waking up with palpitations. And he knows that the turbine is nearby, and he read online that wind turbines cause heart disease. He got a lawyer. He spent a year or two in litigation. I don't actually know. I think this is actually in Michigan. I don't know what the outcome of that. They don't tell me what the details of that. But nonetheless, I had the opportunity to evaluate him. I was brought in to do what they called an independent medical evaluation. I did an interview of him. I did a physical exam. I reviewed his medical records. I spoke to his wife. And it was really clear that he had undiagnosed and untreated obstructive sleep apnea. Which is known to wake people up in the middle of the night. His palpitations was from waking up at night, and to cause increased rapid heart rate from that. So here is a person who undoubtedly had obstructive sleep apnea, a known problem with a treatable outcome that can actually affect human health, who is spending time working through the legal system regarding the turbine that is in his neighborhood. And I think that that's a shame. That's a loss for him. I hope that they settled the court case in a way that was satisfying to everyone. That isn't my concern here. My concern is the lost time and the misattribution, the mistreatment. Similarly, a 40-something-year-old high school teacher who heard the turbines were coming, quit her job and got a job in another area so that she didn't have to work and live, didn't have to work near where the turbines would be located. And she was concerned, once the turbines were in place, she said, well, I'm sleepy a lot, and I think it's from the turbines. I read online that can do that. And we talked for a bit, and it turned out that in this new job, she's waking up at 4:30 in the morning instead of 6:30 because she's got to have a decent commute, and she hasn't changed the time that she goes to bed. And so I think it was really clear to the two of us that, it seems obvious now, but she's exhausted, not because of the turbine, but because of her fear of the turbine and the behavior that manifests from it. I'll give one last example. I think it's the most potent, and then I'll step down. 60-something-year-old gentleman, farmer, who heard that wind turbines cause balance problems, and he was having balance problems. So, similar story. This was actually a group of people. They were working together with their legal team and to resolve his medical problems through the legal channels. In examining him, really clear that he had a pretty bad neuropathy, which is not feeling the nerves in his feet. He had a resurgence of his alcoholism. He had really bad diabetes that was not under control, but he was working through the legal channels because the wind turbine was causing his imbalance. He was having balance trouble because his nerves were dying from very high sugar levels and from high ethanol levels. Both of those things are treatable issues, addressable issues, but you let a couple of years go by and that's a lot of lost time. Now, I'm not saying that people don't have reasonable things that they can litigate on. What I worry about is that you look on Google, or I look on Google, or someone else looks on it, and this is not to pick on Google, they're a good company, but you look on the internet, let's say, and find information that says your imbalance, your sleeplessness, your heart disease, your sense of self and security, and therefore take actionable steps from that information. I think that's an injustice to the people that are sort of neutral, which is the vast majority of people. And that misinformation can lead to misattribution and can get someone down a pathway that's really actually poor for their health. So when I go to meetings like this from time to time, and as I do occasionally, and I see folks who are against wind turbines, I say, great, have your opinion. It's not really for me to decide. And then I see the sticker that says do no harm, and I say, great, I agree to that too. And then I see folks with that same group get behind the mic and say, if you have these turbines here, you're going to have heart disease, sleeplessness, and so forth. I feel like that is not only doing a disservice in general to the community, it's not an integrity-based, compassion-based piece of information, but much more importantly, I think that actually can and does do harm, and I've seen that firsthand. So sticking with the science, wind turbines in existing communities are not causing an epidemic of health-related issues. We have data to support that they don't. As of April 2019, there's 59,300 or so spinning turbines in the United States. We don't have a health crisis from that. We have data from Health Canada, over 1,000 people, demonstrating that no aspect of health that they measured, not questionnaires, not physiology, up to levels of 46 dBA, we're causing no harm on any of those dimensions. So when people say that the wind turbines are going to cause health effects, I would encourage you to say, well, wait a minute now, what's your information there? Because I've got a lot of information that says that they don't. Don't like turbines, let's talk about that. That seems more relevant. But if you're going to say that, that they cause health effects, let's slow down, because that's just not true. And thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ellen Bogan. I think this is valuable information on the health effects of from wind turbines. And now, before I introduce my next speaker, just as a point of interest, Senator, the speakers are going to remain behind for questions, individual questions. Senator Horne does have to be at office hours, but he invites you to stop by if you have questions or want to talk to him. He'll be at the Tittabawassee Township Hall, so immediately following this. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kenneth Kaliski, and he is highly qualified, but I don't know what all of these letters stand for. So please welcome Ken.
All right. All right. Thank you, Veronica. Thanks for the Chamber for inviting me. I'm going to talk to you today about wind turbine acoustics. I'm a noise control engineer with RSG in White River Junction, Vermont. I'm a PE, so that's professional engineer, with a license in Michigan. And I have 30 years of experience in acoustics. Most importantly, we got into wind turbine acoustics about 25 years ago with one of the first projects of utility scale, which happened to be in Vermont, the Searsburg project. And also the Wind Turbine Technical Activity Committee Chair of the Institute of Noise Control Engineering, that's the INCE up there, and I'm board certified through the Institute, and I serve on the certification board of INCE. So we've been involved quite a bit in research on wind turbine noise and its effects. In particular, of interest to this community, we did a big study for the state of Massachusetts on wind turbine acoustics to inform their regulation process. They're trying to develop new regulations on wind turbine noise, so we provided essentially the technical research for them to establish regulations. We also are currently involved in a big study sponsored by the Department of Energy on acceptance of wind turbine noise in communities. It involves a nationwide survey of people who live around wind farms, and our role in the project is to look at how people respond to noise and what affects noise annoyance from wind turbines. So I'm going to talk to you today. Wind turbine noise is actually a very complicated subject, so I'm going to try to give you some background on wind turbine sound and acoustics, and then talk a little bit about the regulation of wind turbine sound, and then how to mitigate wind turbine sound effects, and then give you a couple of very simple takeaways. So first thing we want to learn about is the decibel scale, and I don't know if you could probably read this from back there, but the decibel scale is essentially the measure of sound pressure level. And on the left side is about 140 decibels on that temperature scale. On the right side is 0. So 0 isn't zero sound, but it's about the threshold of human hearing at mid-frequencies. And about 120, 140 is essentially permanent hearing damage, the very loud sounds. So as an example, a chainsaw is about 110 decibels. And then going down, you might have a riding lawnmower at about 88 decibels at your ear. Driving with your windows open at 50 miles an hour might be about 70 or 80 decibels. My speaking voice is probably about 60 decibels. And then you get to the lower sound levels, a field with crickets, maybe about 50 decibels, your refrigerator, about 43 decibels, and a library, maybe about 38 decibels. The wind turbine sound, most wind turbine sound is about 45 decibels or lower. Some municipalities have standards about 50 or 55 decibels. Some might have 40, but mostly the most common one is about 45 decibels. So we're talking about sounds that are typical of quiet rural areas. So what's the sound level in these areas? Well, we've done measurements, long-term measurements in about 100 locations in around the country. And this slide shows the average sound levels for different types of areas. So this area is mostly agricultural, so that's the second bar here. And so the sound levels tend to range, this is nighttime sound levels, average sound levels, range from about 30 decibels to 60 decibels, with an average of about 41 decibels. And that's under all wind conditions. So in less windier conditions, it might be a little bit less than that. And windier conditions, when the turbines would be operating at full sound power, it would be a little bit more than that. But these are the averages. So that gives you a sense of what the decibel levels are like. So looking at decibel levels again, what is our perception of the sound? 30 decibels isn't half as loud as 60 decibels. In fact, a doubling of loudness is about 10 decibels. So if I go from 40 to 50, it's a doubling of the perceived loudness. 5 decibels is clearly noticeable, and you can just about tell that something's changed when you get about a 3 decibels in broadband sound. What does this mean for turbine setbacks? Well, a 5 decibel change, say in an ordinance, would require about an 80% increase in the setback. So if you had about a 1,200-foot setback before at, say, 45 decibels, you'd require about a 2,000-foot setback at about 40 decibels. So every change in 5 decibels increases the setback by about 80%. And that's about on average. All right. Then there's another component of the sound, not just the level, but the frequency content. And frequency is essentially pitch, lower pitch, higher pitch. It's lower, higher frequency. It's measured in as hertz, or cycles per second. And our human hearing, actually I'll just go right to the next slide. On the bottom there's the frequency. So from about 1 to, or below 20 hertz is infrasound. And this is nominally inaudible to humans, except at very high levels, like rocket launches and so forth. In the middle range, from about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz is our audible frequency range. Most young adults can hear in that range. And then above 20,000 hertz is ultrasound. And we know about ultrasound from medical imagery and so forth. That's inaudible. But our human hearing is very insensitive to low frequency sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to demonstrate this. I'm going to play the same sound at the same level, but you'll notice that you're actually perceiving it at a different sound level because we're relatively insensitive to these low frequency sounds. Okay, so this is it's actually more like 10,000 hertz. But you'll notice, again, there's the same level, but our perception of the sound is different. Our perception of loudness is different depending on the actual frequency. So I'm going to go, I'm going to talk about sound characteristics of wind turbines. Sound is generated from wind turbines mostly based from the blade. Also can be generated from the nacelle, but usually it's from the blade, and it's based on turbulence. So turbulence coming into the blade causing turbulence, basically sound is pressure fluctuations, and so this turbulence causes pressure fluctuations, and it creates sound. And different parts of the blade and different mechanisms cause this sound generation. So the sound can have an effect on audibility and annoyance. Most projects have few or no complaints. This is a study we did in New England on wind turbine or complaints. So we talked to the state or the towns in which these projects were in, all of the projects in New England. We found that 78% of the capacity, wind turbine generation capacity, had 0 complaints in New England. 10% had some complaints. 8% had complaints that were over the statewide standard. So, understandably, understandably, if you have sound levels over the standard, you'd have complaints. Another study by David Hessler and George Hessler found that about 4% of the people who live within 2,000 feet of a wind turbine had some type of annoyance. So in our study in New England, 75% of the complaints came from just 3 wind projects. The biggest number of complaints came from a project which was one of the first projects, was the first project in Maine. And reportedly, the developer had told people that they wouldn't be able to hear the wind turbines. At the same time, they asked for a variance on the standard so that they could generate sound that's higher than the standard. And of course, when the project was built, people not only heard the wind turbines, but it was 5-7 decibels higher than the statewide standard, and people were obviously very upset. There were lawsuits and so forth, and I think people learned from that number one, don't tell folks that you're not going to hear sound from the wind turbines, because everybody's different. No matter, people have different hearing sensitivities. Sometimes the winds are going to be low, sometimes they're going to be high. You can't guarantee audibility to anybody. And the other largest set of complaints was from a wind farm that had icing issues. And again, icing causes higher sound levels, but they were able to install icing detection systems, and those complaints eventually went away because they essentially shut down the turbines during those icing conditions. So next I'm going to talk about regulation. Most people in this room, I think, are involved somehow in regulation of wind turbine sound. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. What makes a good standard? Number one, relevance. So the standard should be relevant to an impact. Dr. Ellenbogen mentioned sleep disturbance as one impact. Interference with conversations is another impact. So the standard should be relevant to some type of impact. Secondly, it should be a repeatable. The standard should be written in such a way that when you do a measurement on one day, and then you do a measurement on another day under the same conditions, you should get the same result. And a lot of times standards are written with metrics or averaging times or so forth where they're not repeatable. The next is predictability. Predictability is that both the developer and the community should have some confidence before the project is built of what the sound level will be. So metrics, again, averaging times, and the standard should be written in such a way that it can be predicted beforehand. And then finally, if the standard is going to be implemented by the town zoning enforcement official, it should have some sense of ease of implementation. Not necessarily as important if you're going to have the developer or an independent engineer do the assessment, but it's important to consider. So the biggest mistakes that people make in making ordinance, I think the biggest is borrowing. If one town makes a mistake or doesn't really think about what they're doing when they make an ordinance, oftentimes another town will borrow that ordinance thinking that they actually thought about it, where they hadn't had much expert input. So we call this the snowball effect that, and as an example, this doesn't happen so much anymore, but we're using these, I've seen this octave band standard from octabands that haven't been used since 1960, but they're involved. They get incorporated into new ordinances just because they've been borrowed so often and moved along the line. Infrasound limits. Infrasound has been shown to be well below perception limits from wind turbines. Putting in infrasound limits into wind ordinances is really an unnecessary expense. It costs a lot of money to measure infrasound. Just the windscreen for an infrasound monitor is almost $3,000. So putting in a standard for an impact that doesn't exist is, in our opinion, is not necessary. Not to exceed ordinances based on an L max. So an L stands for level, and a max, the max is that instantaneous maximum. I'm going to go through this a little bit later, but L max standards are really hard to implement. They're not predictable, and nor are they reliable or based on a set impact. And then also using unspecific language that can be interpreted many ways. So the foundation of a good noise standard are to set your sound level, set the metric, so that's the L. Is it a max? Hopefully not. Is it an equivalent average? If it is some type of average or statistical level, over what time frame does it occur? And then where is it measured? And I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. I think I might be getting too much into the weeds here. But we found that this LEQ, again, L is for level, EQ is for equivalent, so it's the equivalent continuous sound level. It's an average over time, and what's nice about the LEQ is that it's weighted towards the higher sound levels over that period of time. So if I've got a 30 minutes at 40 decibels and 30 minutes at 0, the average isn't 15, the average is 37. It weights that higher sound level much more than any of the lower sound levels. So it's nice for community noise standards because that's how people react. They kind of weight that higher sound levels that they're experiencing over time. Metrics are not interchangeable. So I've seen a lot of cases, I've seen a lot of cases where you say, okay, well, 45 decibels LEQ 1 hour is a good standard. I'm going to now say, well, maybe it's easier if we just make that a maximum. But they're not interchangeable. Once you set a maximum, it's a completely different animal. For example, the World Health Organization has sleep disturbance standards of 45 decibels at night for LEQ 8 hours. That's the average over the 8 hours. But they have another standard for nighttime sleep disturbance of 60 decibels L max. So they're recognizing that it's a different sleep disturbance mechanism for this maximum sound level than it is for an average. So 45 decibels L max isn't the same as 45 decibels LEQ. Again, this is kind of a technical point, but it's important in an ordinance. The longer the averaging time, up to about 1 hour, the more reliable and predictable the sound level is. So that's what we recommend in an ordinance, is about a 1 hour LEQ. And again, an L max is measured over 125 milliseconds. So that is a very short averaging time. And if you're trying to predict the highest 125 milliseconds in a year, well, good luck. It's pretty much impossible. So the sound levels that you create in your ordinance should be related to the location where you're measuring. So if you're measuring, if you have a sound level standard based on sleep disturbance, then you should measure that at the home. If you have an activity interference standard, then that should be measured anywhere on the property. So let's put it all together. We have our sound levels, we have our metrics, averaging time and location. So here's a well-constructed standard that has all of them. No wind turbines shall emit sound levels in excess of the following during operation. So 45 dBA, so 45 is the level. dBA, it's A-weighted sound level, weighted towards the sensitivity of the human ear. LEQ, that's the metric, the equivalent continuous sound level. 1 hour is the averaging time. And then within 50 foot 50 feet of a non-participating residence is a location. It's 45 decibels. That's generally a good sleep disturbance standard. And then we have the location. Okay, so mitigating wind turbine sound, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. This is stuff you can do before permitting and after permitting. Proper siting and turbine selection. There's things you can do before permitting. If after permitting, you can look at if it's a maintenance issue, you can fix the turbines. There are also things you can do both before and after noise-reduced operations, which slows the rotor to reduce noise under certain conditions. Serrated trailing edges, which is a picture of on the bottom of the slide, can reduce noise by 1 to 2 decibels, and then good neighbor agreements. So next, I'm going to talk, this is my last slide, how everybody in this room can help reduce noise annoyance from wind turbines. So why am I talking about fair permitting processes can improve community response? Why is that under noise mitigation? It's because most noise annoyance from wind turbines is not due to the level of sound, but it's due to subjective factors, whether people fear the wind turbines, how they felt that the permitting process went, whether they trust the developer, in part whether they have some financial interest or are aware of financial rewards from the turbines, whether they were in prior opposition or in favor of the project. So this is where regulations, the townships, the counties can help improve community acceptance. Number one, tell the truth. Wind turbines make noise. They can be audible, and some people find them annoying. Not a majority, as I said, about 4% or 5% of people who live within a couple of thousand feet find them annoying. Be fair, acknowledge different points of view, listen and learn, work with the neighbors and developers to address the concerns and have a transparent process. And then finally, be consistent and fact-based. And I'll repeat what Dr. Ellen Bogan said, consider reputable research and use qualified consultants and engineers. Bring in people who have done research on these issues to talk about good research, not necessarily just case studies that people have put on the internet. So my takeaways are very simple. Wind turbines generate sound. They're audible. Some people might find them annoying, but this can be mitigated by an improved community acceptance, can be benefited by well-written regulations and fair and transparent permitting practices based on facts. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that. It's an important part of communities planning for whether or not to have wind. Our final speaker today is Steve Black, and he is with Site Engineering with Black Veatch. So please welcome Steve Black. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me today. There it is. So I'm here to talk about wind development, wind turbine siting, kind of explain the process we go through to place wind turbines on a farm, to find a wind development, and how we site wind turbines, because there's a lot that goes into it, and I want to kind of give some background on how that works. So we'll go through that here. So just first, a little bit about me. I lead all of the wind development activities at Black Veatch. We're a large engineering, construction, consulting firm based out of Kansas City. I'm based out of Denver. We have offices here in Ann Arbor, Michigan as well, and all over the world. So I lead all our North American wind siting. Went to Iowa State, so I'm a Cyclone. Probably aren't any others in the room. And I've been doing wind development for 13 years for Black Veatch. And most of my clients are people like regulated utilities. They're not
independent developers, so I've worked for a lot of utilities, Midwestern utilities, Iowa and Michigan, Western utilities, Oregon and Wyoming, and also Missouri, kind of been all over the U.S., and a few projects outside the U.S. as well. And in my experience, I've sited over 1,000 individual wind turbine sites. A number of those are here in Michigan. I've done a lot of work up in the Thumb for over the last 10 years. And in addition to developing our own layouts, we also review projects, developments, layouts from other developers as well. So I've done thousands of wind turbines, either siting them myself or reviewing other people's siting. And I want to talk about how we try and balance siting wind turbines with the community needs and the needs of the farm itself. So the wind project needs to be able to, sorry, I'm one slide ahead of myself here. So we've got a lot of things. We got setbacks, we got wildlife, we got regulations, how much energy will we make, how much energy will we lose to inherent losses in the wind farm itself from turbine-to-turbine wakes or electrical losses. We also have to consider the sound impacts, as Ken and Jeff had discussed. We also have to consider things like shadow flicker, and we have to consider farmers and how farmers use their land. So, as I was saying, we have to balance the needs of a wind project to make money, to be economical, to actually have a positive value to its owners, and the needs of the community, because the community is a big part of a wind farm. We have to be part of the community. The wind farm covers thousands of acres and affects hundreds of people directly and indirectly. So we have to look at the needs both of the people owning the project to make money, but also of the community and the people who live there to live their lives. So in siting wind turbines, one of our key tools is we call setbacks, and a lot of setbacks might be in regulation. We might have local ordinance that gives us distances we must maintain from certain items. We also have a number of setbacks we apply as either best practices or similar. So we start at the very top by applying a certain set of constraints to turbine siting to protect safety, and that's the safety of people, mostly, property secondary, and it's running ahead on me. Also setbacks for quality of life, so to try and minimize our negative impacts on local landowners, local residents. We also have requirements that we have to meet for protecting wildlife, for protecting communications, for environmental factors, wetlands and floodplains, for example. And then local law might regulate some of it, and in addition, we do a lot beyond whatever the local law says in most cases. So most of our setbacks are based on the size of a wind turbine. So when I'm referring to distances, I'm usually referring to a ratio to the size of the actual machine. So some of the key dimensions we talk about are the rotor diameter. So that's the diameter of the actual turbine rotor if it was a circle. The tip height, or the total height, which is the height from ground to the very, very top of the machine when the rotor blades are as high as they get. And the hub height, which is the height from the ground to the center of the rotor. So those are our kind of key wind turbine dimensions. And most of our setbacks should be based on these dimensions. So the safety-based setbacks, which is where we start, these are, again, to protect people, and this is our absolute minimum regardless of anything else. So even in the case of no local requirements, no ordinances, there's certain setbacks we won't go below. And this is based around homes, schools, churches, places of where people work, where people are actually occupying most of the time. It also applies to public roadways, rights of way, parks, and so on. Sorry, this just keeps running ahead of me. And they vary, like I said, by total height. So that's the safety-based setbacks. That's our first pass. On top of that, we have setbacks for quality of life. So this is on top of the minimums, where we usually increase distances from residences as our primary here. And this is to definitely reduce negative perception, reduce sound, reduce shadows, reduce just the visibility So it's usually a pretty significant increase from the base of the safety. We also have environmental, wildlife, communications, and other setbacks. So this is bat habitat, for example. We have to maintain certain distances depending on bat species and habitat type and occupation. Also applies to eagle habitat, eagle nests, other raptor nests, other endangered or threatened species. So there's wildlife studies that are part of every wind farm development that we bring into play and address here. We also have communication studies to make sure we're not interfering with licensed communication paths. That's largely point-to-point communications for like microwave beams, which is a very common communications method used out there, and those are line of sight. We also review cell phone, TV, radio reception as a standard part of development, but you wouldn't see those in like a setback map. That'd be a separate review. We also look for underground utilities, and that's underground electrical, gas, oil pipelines, and work with those owners to make sure we're not impacting negatively those utilities. So I've got a set of slides here now that I'm going to kind of run through a little bit quickly that show how what happens as we apply these primary setbacks to wind farm development. So what I'm presenting here is a series of setbacks for a typical actual wind farm development in Michigan, and how each individual item I kind of just walked through applies on top of the last to come to a total amount of land we can use to build a wind farm. So this is a development site. I'm showing just one township, so 36 square miles, a nice, easy, simple square township. In this, it's probably hard to see on this screen, we have participating land and non-participating land. And non-participating land is the hashed land. And you'll see this more clearly in just a few slides. So the first thing is we have a setback in this case from the project boundary, where we're just staying back really about twice the hub height. This is just a courtesy setback from the edge of the project. There is, in this case, a small village in the northwest corner of the project, so we have a quarter-mile setback from the village boundary. Then we have all the local roads, and there's one railroad line in this site as well. So here we're applying a setback for safety of 1.1 times the total height. So in the very unlikely case of like a turbine collapsing, falling over, it would not land on a public right-of-way. And while that's extremely rare, it's very important that we consider this. We also have, in this site, we have a couple roads that have very, very heavy use. Constant traffic, lots and lots of people. So for wintertime conditions, for operation in case of ice buildup on the turbines, we have a kind of a risk-based additional setback to minimize or eliminate that risk. Brings us up to a little over 1,000 feet. And we have an alternative option here, is if we can detect ice buildup on the blades with most modern wind turbines and shut them down if that's occurring. That's an alternative way to approach this. But for this case, we had these large public roads. We stayed back a little bit farther. And you'll see when we get to the houses that it almost applies no matter what. So let's see, then we have overhead utilities. So I have transmission, distribution, telephone wires here. This is, again, that kind of turbine height plus 10% from all public utilities, overhead utilities. I mentioned communications paths. We have 2 microwave paths here through this site. So they show up as these just 2 lines. We stay back, keep the rotor from crossing the communications path so we don't get in the way. And then we have a setback for non-participants, and this is, again, that total height setback for the wind turbines, so that we're staying back a reasonable and fair distance from the neighbor's land. And that's mostly applying to farmland in this case, which takes a large amount of land out of play. Then we have occupied structures, and this is the homes. This is the housing setback. So in this case, participants, so those who are part of the project, have a minimum setback in this case of about 1,000 feet. Usually we would aim for more, but this would be the minimum. And then we usually recommend a quarter mile in general, especially for non-participants. So we're applying 1,000 feet for participating residents, quarter mile for non-participating, and as possible, we also go farther away when we're actually placing the wind turbines in the site. So that's kind of the last one I'm showing here. We end up with this inverted picture of here's everywhere we can put wind turbines. So we started with everywhere we can't. Now here's everywhere we can. That's our baseline, and on top of this we would have the environmental, the wildlife, wetlands, and other items. So that's what we have to work with, and this varies a lot by whatever the local requirements are, but this is kind of a typical process. So on top of that, now we have the land we can work with. Now we need to place wind turbines on this land. And we have to consider how windy is it, what direction does the wind come from. We have to consider what kind of wind turbines we're using, how far we have to space them apart. Have to consider constructability. Can we get a road to where we want to put the machine is a big part of it. We have to consider wiring. Can we connect these machines together because they all get connected together with underground cables. We also have to consider local preferences, have to consider how the land is used, how it's farmed, and we have to consider what all our other effects are, including shadow flicker. So here's an example turbine layout. This might, again, be kind of hard to see on this screen, but we took that buildable land, that available land that we had before, and we placed wind turbines in there. And you can see we've got 3 sections or 4 sections in this area that we were able to fit physically up to 4 machines. The ovals are our turbine-to-turbine spacing guidelines that we applied to this project, and that's based on energy production. That's based on turbine, sort of turbine life, and it varies by wind resource, varies by wind direction, varies by wind turbine model, but this is a pretty standard. And then we've got in the middle, we've got some area we're not using because it's heavily forested. So although it's technically buildable, we're staying out of it. So this is kind of a typical process for a first pass on wind turbine siting. But we don't just do everything in the desktop. We don't do everything on a computer. So then we'll go out to the field. We do a couple rounds of review. So we'll start with usually a windshield-based review where we get in the car, we drive the entire site, look at every wind turbine from the public road, make an evaluation based on what we can see. Does this site make sense? Are we doing something that makes sense, or are we doing something that's going to be very expensive or something that's going to be very disruptive? Make some changes back in the office based on that, and then we'll usually come back and we'll do a detailed review. So I was just out here about 2 weeks ago doing exactly that in this region of Michigan, where we go site by site, look at the wind turbine, look at how we're going to build it, see if that makes sense. And we're endeavoring, as the whole time we do this, try and minimize any negative impacts on farming, any negative impacts on residences, making sure we're not missing something important. So the last thing I want to touch on, and I realize I'm going fairly quickly here, but I wanted to touch on shadow flicker because this is one of the most difficult parts of siting a wind project in an area like Michigan where we have gridded roads, we have houses every mile. Any very, very tall structure like a wind turbine, which is typically about 500 feet tall, will cast shadows when it's sunny out. And then because the wind turbines are rotating, those shadows are moving. And so we have to consider the effects of that moving shadow on people's lives and how we can minimize that, how we can eliminate that, what we can do to protect people's comfort. Shadow flicker, the strength of the flickering effect varies very, very strongly by the sun conditions, the atmospheric conditions, by distance, by being indoors or outdoors, where indoors it's much more noticeable because if you have indoor illumination from the window, it's coming from one small square of light versus being outdoors where you are kind of illuminated by the whole sky. So the crossing of the shadow is much more noticeable indoors. And we focus on the indoor, on residences, on houses for this. It's only cast when both the house or the receptor and the turbine are in the sun. That should be obvious, but it is only when it's actually sunny. It's only cast when the turbines actually move. And the flicker rate is usually every second or so in most cases, so about once a second. And I think the important thing I want to note is consider a quality of life issue. It's an annoyance issue. It is something we need to be very aware of as we site wind turbines. But it's not considered a health issue. And if anybody has questions about that, I'm actually not the person to talk to. But there are some studies out there, some of the ones that Dr. Ellenbogen mentioned earlier, do discuss this, and it's mostly considered an annoyance issue. And the other thing is we can't easily deal with this with just setbacks. We have to deal with this through careful siting of wind turbines. The exact impact of any individual turbine or any individual wind farm on a house is actually very, very difficult to predict. We can very easily predict when it could happen, the maximum possible worst case, and that is if it was always sunny, if the turbines were always running, if they were always facing straight into the sun. We can predict that, and that's our starting point, but we have to be also realistic about it and consider that, how often is it sunny, where is the wind coming from, when does the wind blow. So getting the exact impact right is almost impossible, but getting the cumulative impact right for siting decisions is what we focus on. I mentioned there's very limited studies on shadow flicker and its effects relative to some other health effects, and there's two kind of big ones I want to hit on. There's a Massachusetts study here, published in 2012, and then the Strategic Health Impact Assessment in Oregon, published in 2013. Kind of as I mentioned, they both talk about shadow flicker, both discuss it in terms of annoyance. And again, it's about as much as I want to say about that without getting outside my area of expertise. So how do we do a shadow flicker analysis? Well, we calculate the sun position every hour of the day, every day of the year for a typical year. It changes year to year, but very, very little, by a minute here or a minute there. So we can usually run an assessment for a next year, and it is valid for the next about 15 to 20 years. The models, we use the models and the results of those models to affect how we place wind turbines, where we place them. We're focused again on houses when we're reviewing this, where people are living. On top of the raw results, the bare bones results of when it could happen if it was always sunny, we do a statistical analysis to predict the realistic impacts in a typical year. We use long-term weather data, we use the site wind data to take those raw results and convert them to what could happen in a typical year. In the U.S., most wind developments, in lieu of any other regulation, target a maximum of 30 hours of impact at any residence. And if additional mitigation is required, if somebody is having a legitimate annoyance issue, most owners that I've worked with have, when we have the capability to implement mitigation methods through operations, we can shut machines off during the times we calculate we could be causing shadow flicker, and we can combine that with sensing so we know if it's sunny or not. So we shut them off only if it's sunny to minimize the economic impact to the project. But we can mitigate. So again, we minimize through siting the wind turbines. But on a typical site, typical Midwestern farm in Michigan, because there's houses on every single mile of our nice mile grids out in the country, there's usually at least one house. So we can't zero it out through siting. But we've had owners, as I mentioned, be very successful in calculating when the flicker can occur and then implementing a control strategy to eliminate it. So it's a combination of siting and of operations. And so we can very much reduce our negative impacts through that. And that's pretty much the end of my study, as I just kind of want to reiterate everything I just set up here. We start from a site with as much as we know about it, and we apply a whole bunch of setbacks and constraints and requirements to that to come up to what we can actually build. So we don't just put turbines wherever we want. We do carefully consider owners, landowners, farmers, residences as we site, and we try and work as much as we can with the local community and the local landowners to have a positive influence, a positive impact on the community, and minimize our negative externalities. So thank you again for your time. That's all I had today.
Well, I want to thank all of our speakers today. We hope you found it valuable. Again, they'll be around later for individual questions. Right now, we want to take a brief break, and our second session is going to begin promptly at 9:30. So please, if you haven't eaten, grab something or just take a brief break. Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited to announce this second panel. These are the people that are on the ground that have experienced wind energy. These are local government officials who are in communities that have wind projects. We asked them to come in and talk to you about the realities of wind energy related to economic impact, home values, lessons learned, and future plans. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on each of them, and then we'll have them talk a little. This one is not as formally structured, so we're even going to pose some questions if they don't touch on some of the topics that you're interested in. So Bill Renn has served as Chandler Township Supervisor since 1989 and has served as a member and then president of the Michigan Township Association. He's overseen multiple wind projects in Chandler and Oliver Townships beginning in 2008. Chandler now has 87 wind turbines, 2 measurement towers, and a substation, all related to wind generation in the area. Then we'll have Doug Merchant. Doug has served as the Arcata Township on the Arcata Township Board since 1986 and as Township Supervisor in 1988. He's been Township Assessors for Arcata in 1989, Bethany Township Assessor in 1998, and Pine River Township Assessor in 2004. Douglas has been involved with wind turbine projects since 2012. Kevin Beeson is a supervisor of Pine River Township and has been a driving force in collaborative efforts across Gratiot County. Pine River Township saw the largest producing wind farm brought online this year, relying on Mr. Beeson to guide the project through the Planning Commission and Board of Trustees. All 3 gentlemen have served on the Michigan Townships Association's Board of Directors, 2 of which are past presidents. Mr. Beeson is also Finance Chair of Greater Gratiot Development Corporation, which is our sister organization in Gratiot County. So let's get started, and we'll start with Bill.
Good morning to you. Oh, I get to use the mic. Good morning, everyone. I'm my full-time job is I work with a neighbor on farming, so if I'm not quite as sharp as I should be, why it's been the last 3-4 days have been a little long, so it we'll work our way down through it. I am a part-time supervisor. My community, Chandler Township, is a 36 square sections. We're located, for those of you that are familiar with Huron County, I'm straight north of the village of Elkton, Laker High School. I'm 1 row of sections in off the lake, so my community, to say it's rural, is about as rural as you're going to find. 500 residents, better part of 3,500 cows, the 87 turbines, and it started off 10 years ago with John Deere coming into the area and visiting with, it was mainly at the time Oliver and Windsor Township farmers, and we were included just on our southern border with the first project. But as the discussions were going along, we realized quickly, the farmers asked us to develop a wind ordinance. Luckily, our county was working on one at the time, so we worked along with the county, and our ordinance pretty much mirrors the county. There's a few little changes, but just minor. It served us well. The first project that John Deere had, called Harvest Wind, 1, brought 5 turbines into Chandler Township. I'm trying to remember backwards. 5 years later, Harvest 2 came into being, also by John Deere, and that brought in additional 20-some turbines. Later on is when DTE was involved and brought in the ECHO project in 12, and a little expansion of it in, gotta think, 2 years ago. That became an expansion of the ECHO project. It was called the Pinnipog project, but so that brought us our total up to the 87 turbines, which is a lot of turbines in any one township, unless it's changed recently. Why I believe it is the highest number of wind turbines in a township. But the project started off, we were very fortunate in the fact that majority of the property owners are residents of our township. Majority of the residents of our township are involved in agriculture and understood where the farmers were coming from. The biggest issue that we ran across is the fact of, at that point, trying to get information, whether it was on the turbines themselves, how to lay it out. Working with the county, we decided on an overlay district aspect of it, trying to promote ag preservation as being number one. Agriculture is our livelihood, and we wanted to protect the farmers on the way through this. So as we developed our ordinance, part of it was that agriculture was key, and we encouraged all the turbines and the access roads to be laid out on property lines within the overlay district. This, for the most part, has worked excellent. It gives a division for the farmers, and has worked out very well through the projects. Why there was a lot of fence rows that got cleaned up. Farmers really appreciated that aspect of it. When you go through the construction process, it is a learning experience, to say the best. It is disruption of the soil. It is changing traffic patterns. It is additional work for the township. The site plan review process for the township involves a notebook that just short of a dictionary that needs to be reviewed. If your planning commission is on the ball and your township board, you go into it with the facts in front of you and available to you. We were fortunate. I feel sorry for those of you that are into it now with the anti-people that have a tendency to travel around throughout the state. We were ahead of that. Again, my township, for all intents and purposes, I would say 95% support. The sign up, as far as participating property, I don't know where it ends up at this point in time, but I know it was well over 80% of the property in my township was signed up under wind leases or involved in it. So it was a pretty, I shouldn't say easy. When you saw the siting plans with all the setbacks from roads, houses, and the like, we reviewed a lot of those plans, and it really blows your mind when you apply all of the good intentions of people regarding setbacks and the like to a plan, and then expect you to insert wind turbines in there. It is difficult. Even in a rural community as mine, the setbacks took it down to, majority of my township is 2 turbines in a section. I believe I have one section that might have 4, but the vast majority of them are 2 and 3. Again, it has been when the companies that are involved, John Deere in the beginning was purchased by Exelon and DTE. So the 2 companies, DTE and Exelon, own both the 2 projects, the 2 major projects in my township. And we have had a good working relationship with them. They have been responsive to complaints, and to say that, as was mentioned about the fact of turbines make noise, they're visual, they're flashing lights. When I'm asked about it, they asked, well, what would you do different? Well, we'd all like to go back to the days of simpler times, and it's part of the time change. And as long as we base our knowledge on factual information, it will work for you, and the people respect you for it. There are anyone that becomes involved in a wind turbine project will have reams and reams of paper delivered to them, or suggested that they read regarding internet information, whether it be turbine catastrophes or the health issues related to turbines. And I remember one of the last site plan reviews that we did, we had a number of people come in that had concerns with the health issues and the whole 9 yards. And my planning commission chairman, after the presentations were done and the like, made the comment to them, because they're our neighbors. These people were outside the township, but they're our neighbors and people that we grew up with. And he said, understand your concern. The concern that we as a planning commission have is we need factual information. And they started carrying on about studies in Wisconsin and the like. He said, at that point, we had turbines in Huron County for 7 years. And his comment is when you bring us the statement from a doctor, from people here that have associated health issues, we will most definitely look into, review, and try to make corrections that we can. And they have yet to return. In the last 3 years, it squashes. It's too bad that there is that misinformation that's being applied out there. I was very interested in the report from the sleep study and those type of issues, because that's the type of thing that we hear all the time. You know, sleep loss. I've lived within the turbines. The Harvest Wind 1 almost 10 years ago brought a turbine within 3/4 of a mile of my house, right out the end of my driveway. And my comment is at first, yeah, I thought that was too bad it had to be there, but as we've gone through the process, now when I drive out the driveway in the morning, I look at the turbine to see which way the wind's blowing. It's part of life. It becomes part. The flashing red lights. As now my house is surrounded with the turbines. As I stated, why pretty much every section has got turbines in. So I guess you could say we're in a red light district, but it again once once you go through the process, it's no different than for a farm boy headed for the city. Why, the first night you're in the city or the first couple nights that you're in the city, why you can't hardly stand trying to get sleep. It's something different, living beside the railroad tracks. Turbines make noise? Yes, turbines make noise. If I'm outside, I can hear a turbine. Where we farm around 10, now I even got to think, yeah, about 10 turbines that we farm around. Yeah, they're there. You can hear them. To say that you can't hear them is completely false. Does it bother you? No. Like I said, you can hear them. It's not that you can't carry on a conversation. If the wind's blowing at ground level, very seldom that you'll hear the turbine because of the fact that the trees are rustling, or in the fall of the year when the wind's blowing through a cornfield, why the rustling of the corn leaves far outweigh the turbines. So it's just part of the process, and you taking the time to be here and try and get the actual facts is the best thing that you can do. I'll leave it with that.
Good morning again, everyone. As I said, my name is Doug Merchant. I've been involved with the wind turbines since 2012 when they came into Bethany Township. And I think I can thank Bill here because some of the things that he just talked about, he took away from me, and we'll leave it to Kevin here at the tail end to fill in for us. So, on the assessing side, I guess, being an assessor with them, the people did come in and complain that, this is going to lower our values on our residential homes out in the areas. They came into border review to start with. We work on statistics, and, we went back and said, provide us the data. We're going to have to wait for sales to see what happens out here. And, with that, I went back to 2013 and started looking. And the first 4 years, we did see a drop in residential values. 13, a 2%, 14, a 2%, another 2% drop. 2015, we've seen a 10% drop in residential values. In 2017, we've seen a 20% increase in residential values, a 7.7 in 18, and in 19, we raised another 16.6%. in residential, and that's all due to sales within the township. And last year alone, at Board of Review, for 2 days, we had 2 people walk in the door, and none of them were there to talk about the wind turbines, devaluing their homes. So, that theory has been kind of thrown out the door. Farmland prices, I also went back and checked to see what farms have sold. We've had 2 farms that have sold since 2013. Well, not 2 farms, but 1 farm of 138 acres that had a wind turbine on it. It sold for an average of $7,500 an acre. So I started looking around to find the closest one to that. It was within a mile away, had a 40-acre farm, sold for $76.75. It didn't have a turbine on it. So we haven't had enough sales yet to determine what farmland's going to do with, having these turbines out there also. But in other areas of our county, we've had land sell for $10,000 and $12,000 with no turbines. So, we have to go by our statistics, so we can't really say that, we've lost value out there because of them. We've seen them go up and down, and, from 13 to 16, we had some depressed times right at that time in the whole, state of Michigan. So, that could have been part of the reason for the decline. But as far as, anything else, I think our biggest issues that we're having with the wind turbines, it falls with working with the state of Michigan on the depreciation tables. When we started out, we had a 15-year depreciation table that went down to 30%, and then stayed there for the rest of the life of the turbines. Then the State Tax Commission come along a couple of years later and says, nah, we're going to move them down to a 6-year depreciation table and bring them down to 30%. The townships and communities, from the school districts to the RSED to the counties, all went together and created a Michigan Renewable Energy Collaboration called MREC. We went to our legislators. At that time, Brian Calley was our lieutenant governor. Came back and negotiated, and it's moved it out to a 12-year. We are now, what we're using right now is a depreciation table that MREC has come up with by going out and getting appraisal studies done. The State Tax Commission says if you can prove something different, you can use that. We've put one back to a 15-year depreciation table. It's not been accepted by the State Tax Commission, but we're using it. The companies are working with us right now. All the wind turbine companies have settled except for consumers and DTE, and I know I've got DTE members here in the room, but we're all in agreement that we want this to come to an end and get an agreement on this, and I think we're very close. But DTE has been great to work with. This last year in Pine River Township, we had 27 turbines come on board along with a substation. I had received all my statements, was processing them. That's a busy time of the year for us, trying to get all these in. We have to have them by the 20th, and we have to have all of our notices tried to sent back out by the 27th. So we're pushing through these ourselves. I received a call after the 27th, after I'd sent out all my notices from DT saying, what's this parcel number that's out here? And I look it up and I says, that's your substation. Well, we don't have a substation in Pine River Township. I says, give me 10 minutes. So I sent him the picture that I have of the substation. And he says, oh, well, we listed it in Isabella County. I guess we've got to do an amended. So, that became a $6 million picture to Pine River Township when it goes on. But as I said, the companies have been great to work with, and so on. But so with that, I think that pretty much covers what I have to talk about on the assessment side. So I probably got a few minutes extra. So we'll leave it up to Kevin. He's a pretty good speaker, and he can fill it in our time for us. So thank you.
I'm Kevin Beeson. I'm the supervisor at Pine River Township. And for those of you who are not familiar with Gratiot County, Pine River is kind of centered in between Elma and St. Louis. So right along M46, right straight west of here. So it kind of helps me understand. Could I just get a show of hands of how many people in the room are township-based officials? Okay, thank you. And the reason I ask that is the slides that I'll show you, and there's only 4 or 5, so I won't bore you to tears, but the slides kind of had an awakening to me, I guess, when I prepared for today's meeting. I never stopped to think that the 1 mil that I collect as a township, which is really 9/10 of a mil, thank you to the Headley Amendment, is really just part of the picture of the revenue that a turbine farm will bring to your community. We'll take into the details on that here in a second, but I want you to know that when you're facing these challenges, as all of us do, you're not representing just those people that are in your township. You've got a county, you've got the whole quality of life for that whole region, including same thing happens in Saginaw. I know. I mean, it does make a difference. Pine River is much bigger than Chandler Township. We have 2,500 people and probably 15,000 cows. So, but I can't sit in that chair. I'm sorry. the gist of where we're headed with today's presentation from Gratiot County, I'd like to show you some simple facts, and I tried to make it as big as I could and still get it on the screen. I have sat on the Greater Gratiot Development Board of Directors for at least 10 years. I don't know, could be 15. So I'm familiar with the Saginaw Future mission. That's what we do in Gratiot. We try to attract business. We try to do things that enhance revenue, that make it a better place to live and raise a family. And that takes money. Anybody in the room got all the money you need to do everything you want to do? You can fix your own roads. You can build your own township hall. You can provide dial-a-ride. You can provide all the water. It never happens. So we can sit here and say that there's no reason other than somebody wants to come in and put up a turbine that we'd consider it. You can't take out of the picture the fact that these guys are huge. Each turbine that came on in Pine River is about $3 million a pick. You take 27 of those, round it up with a substation. I got a $90 million project. You know, I went on Saginaw County's website, looked at their equalization stuff, because I was curious in Saginaw County, how many projects, how many taxpayers in Saginaw County pay on a value of $90 million. You got like 2 or 3 at the top. You know who the top taxpayer in Saginaw County is? Energy. Energy is number 1. ITC is number 3. And I forget who number 2 was. Thank you. Next year. There you go. And by the time you're at 90 million, I mean, you're right there. And I've got 27 little turbines out here in Pine River doing kind of that same thing, having that same kind of an economic impact. And that's a pleasant problem to have if you can solve how you make them work. The gentleman that spoke in the first half of this morning's session answered, really, those are the questions that we always get. You know, I want to know what you do about the red light on the top. I want to know why I can hear it. I want to know why I get a little shadow flicker. Beyond that, it's an ag area. It's not in your residential backyard underneath your swimming pool or above it. It's out in a farm ground that Bill's out here farming every day. That you know, when the tractor goes by, they gotta make a little divot. You know, it's taking up an acre of ground, and they're pretty careful. Other than that, it's just out there turning with God's wind. In Gratiot County, we've got 217 turbines countywide. There are 65 more planned that will actually butt up against Saginaw County out in Lafayette Township. So it'll be a little south of 46, maybe 5-6 miles. As you can see over time, we started with the first project, an Invenergy project, with 133 turbines. It stayed pretty steady. We added some other projects. The first was up here in this corner. M46 is across the top of the screen to get your reference. In the blue, you're right at Meridian Road and M46. Those 4 townships split up 133 turbines back in 2012. Almost at the same time, but the next summer, an additional 33 turbines were built in the BB Community Wind Project. The following summer, they added another 21, so you can see the logical growth. And it's actually that green and yellow area they're going to come back and infill again with these 66 turbines that we're talking about now. Pine River Wind is up here, and I only show you the part that's in Pine River Township. When Invenergy approached us, they also approached Isabella County and Coe Township that's right immediately north of us. And between those two, Paul, you got to help me. Is it 65 turbines, I think, the whole project? If I remember right. The majority went north of the line, but it was close. It was close. And we got the substation, so I'm just... And nobody complains about substations, by the way. They just sit there and they hum a little bit and sit out in the woods and do their thing. So we've got, that's the path. You can see Polaris Wind is scheduled for next year, 65 turbines. Over on the west edge, in the purple, is Carson City at M57 if you wander over that way. That would be a announced power purchase agreement with Consumers Energy, and they're developing that on their own. So in Gratiot, we've got a mix of Invenergy owns a handful, Gratiot Wind, DTE, and eventually Consumers, all in a bunch. And it's not about the money, but I can't lie, it's always about the money. No matter how you look at this is part of the story that you've got to at least wrap your arms around and say, that's okay, I'm not interested, but I defy you to do that. $43 million worth of taxes have been collected in Gratiot County and stayed in Gratiot County over the last 7 years, and it's all due to those turbines that I just showed you. $43 million. They started, come on at half value 1 year. 2013 is the first year, collected almost $7 million in the first year. You watch them depreciate, you see others come on. There's kind of a steady line, and as Doug said, there's a continuing argument. It's not so much with the companies or with the state tax commission, it's just something new. We got to work through, figure out what that right balance is, and move forward. But in 2018, the most recent year, Gratiot collected just as shy of $6 million. And when I told you that, Pine River is really proud of its 9/10 of a mill that I get to run all of the general operations in the township, the green area up there is our local schools and RESDs. They collect $22.1 million, and that all goes towards making better schools at less cost to residences throughout the community. The purple is Gratiot County, and that's not the county's general fund. That includes it, but it also includes all of those special voted millages. Who in this room doesn't pay a special voted millage? Yeah. So the sheriff, that road patrol that you voted $1 million to pay, they get $1 million off that $90 million that we just added on there. The library, the ambulance, the senior citizens, the mosquitoes, all of those millages pay on everything that those wind turbines are taxed at. And when you look at the slice of that pie, the 43 million, it's amazing when you do this graph and you're sitting there going, wow, I thought that the $60,000 or $70,000 that my little township got was a game changer. It's not when you start looking at the millions that happen here. This is the Pine River Wind Project. It's hard to describe because it's in 2 counties. M46 is down here at the blue and the green. And what I'm trying to show with this slide is that there were 36 turbines that went into Isabella, which is the red area up at the top. 2 turbines went into Bethany adjacent to me. And again, that's kind of the siting thing that the gentleman talked about earlier. It was in Bethany Township, but it made no sense because the Pine River literally orphaned that area. Now that they had turbines on the other side of the road, they jumped back and infilled with a couple of turbines there and fed them coming off the other side through our township. And then, of course, ours is the blue down at the bottom. 161 megawatts of power, enough to power 54,000 homes with those 65 turbines that you see on that screen. It's not people, that's homes, 55,000. Gratiot County has 40,000 residents. So it's not just little generators in your backyard that you fire up when your utility can't provide power. These are monsters that really do make an impact in Michigan. The darkened areas, it's not a geographic map. It's the darkened areas are showing all of those farmers, all of those landowners that signed up. As Mr. Renn said earlier, it approaches 80% of the property in my township, in Coe Township, and Bethany, in that area, that wanted to participate, that signed agreements. It does make it a lot easier as a public official to look at that map and go, well, I'm not standing up here alone. I've got a lot of people behind me that thought that this was a good deal, so much that they put their land on the line. In the construction period, I don't think we talk about that enough. We get hung up on whatever the issue of the moment is. It's always wind flicker, it's always noise. These guys came in, and other than knowing them in adjacent townships and sitting on boards with Bill and hearing how well it went, if you'd have told me that a company could come in and build 65 turbines in 6 months, bringing 3 blades at a time on trucks that are 140 feet long, 140 feet they had to build at their expense, curves on our square mile roads, you couldn't turn them around a corner. They came through Lansing, coming out of Muskegon, because there was no way to get across the state. They had to wander down on freeways to get these things here. The logistics of watching these 250, contractors working all summer long. Each concrete base for a turbine, 400 to 600 yards of concrete. Elma Concrete was really happy to see these guys come to town. I mean, they put people to work in our community, bringing gravel, bringing cement, mixing concrete, driving trucks and pours. It made a significant difference. Anybody in the room haul gravel? It's a good year to haul gravel if you're going to work with a wind turbine company, because they're building roads, they're going out in fields, they're making construction that lets these cranes operate. And all that is spin-off. The hardware store. Everybody's got their hometown hardware store. You've never seen my hardware guy smile any more than he did that summer. And he talks about the gallons of, or not gallons, but cases of, yellow and orange and pink marking paint that they're buying, and hammers, and buying more of this. His retirement's looking a lot better, and he wanted to shake our hand and say, I'm glad you can see some of this kind of construction happen. But they started in April, and they finished about deer season, essentially done. I mean, they're always wrapping things up, but that was it. During that entire season, I didn't have a complaint from a resident about anything that they did. They picked up after themselves. They put it in the ground. They graded the roads. They provided brine for the roads, the gravels. The blacktops, they didn't damage. The crane, you got to see a crane that sticks up in the air 400 feet. It takes them a week to assemble it. They can't tear it down to move it across the street. They pile gravel, I swear to God, 6 feet above blacktop roads. They drive this thing up and over. They've got consumers that are disconnecting power so they can get it back and forth. Residents, mine, weren't standing there complaining. They were standing there with their cameras going, holy cow, you can live a whole lifetime and never see something like this out in farm country. Same day, gravel's picked up, water truck come, hose the road off, and you never knew they were there. So it's not as bad as some would argue that it is. The revenue certainly helps it make sense. This sheet is what we like to call it Greater Gratiot, our fine print. I'm not even going to try to go through it. I'm sure there's a phone number on there for our gals at Greater Gratiot that could explain it in detail. But it's the honest to God's truth. When someone tells you that they read somewhere in Iowa that it doesn't pay, that it doesn't do this, you can look and you can see township by township, school district by school district, which, by the way, Saginaw County School District, or the RESD, is getting some money, because some of those turbines that I showed you on our eastern edge, Saginaw's western edge, are in the Merrill School District. So there is an impact already from turbines in Saginaw, while it's not much. In my final, I just have to say, I live in Pine River Township, but I grew up and went to school in St. Louis. If any of you know St. Louis, you know that we had this wonderful industrial plant called Michigan Chemical. They sold out to a little company called Velsicol. Anybody ever heard this story? Velsicol had a couple of boneheads that couldn't figure out how to put stuff in the right bag, and somehow it got into cattle feed, and we had the entire PBB crisis generated half-mile from where I live today. This was when I was in high school in 1976. Move forward to 2019, the EPA has worked on cleaning up this site half-mile from my house with the chemical contamination, and they're only $100 million short of being done. That's how close they are to thinking that they restored what that chemical plant did. We've got Total Petroleum in Elma that was there, a refinery. They closed because big business bought them out and said, you know, it'd be a lot better for us if we just charge more money to bring that in from Chicago or Detroit. We don't need those little plants. That property still sits vacant due to the chemical contamination, petroleum contamination under the site. I get passionate when I talk about trying to save the earth, and I'm not a tree hugger. I don't want to say that, but I'm telling you, there's something comfortable to look out your bedroom window in the morning, just like Bill said, driving out the driveway. I can generally tell which way the wind's blowing. I can tell you that the wind is blowing. It makes a difference how you're going to dress. And it's just God's putting in those blades. They're just sitting there, just slowly turning in the sky. And that's nice to know that maybe the legacy I leave for my kids and my grandkids is better than what we did 50 years ago when we weren't paying attention. It's not an environmental thing. Nothing comes without cost. Everything has a risk. Everything that we do, whether you're next here, whether you're a hospital, there's always a chance something goes wrong and the neighborhood isn't the same as it was. But these turbines in ag ground, you know, they're preserving the farm. They really are. And they're making some pretty clean electricity. So that's where I stop.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank our three panelists. We've actually got a little bit of time, and I know each of them have a few things to say, but one thing we didn't talk about was zoning and how you guys decided what type of zoning you should put in place, and did you get experts to help you? Did you use somebody else's ordinance, or did you make one up yourself? I know that, Bill, you had something, though, you wanted to ask first, so go ahead.
Kevin reminded me of the tax revenue, and while mine is not quite as nicely colored as Kevin's is, I put it together, and these numbers that I'm going to give you are taxable value numbers for turbine and turbine related. So it'd be the substation, underground lines in Chandler Township. And we're strictly talking Chandler Township, the 87 turbines. And from the time they went in back in 2008, that those five turbines that were involved, the taxable value was at $2,700,000. Through the years, as we continued to add turbines, depreciate turbines, the whole 9 yards, just prior to the major construction in 12, and another thing I need to add is those first turbines that were put up on Governor Jennifer's Granholm. And one of the things that she insisted on was that they be, I just drew a blank, 50%. No. Factories get it. Reduction.
Oh.
Tax abatement, yes. So the first turbines, the Harvest Wind 1 project and the Michigan Wind project were both at 50% discounted. They were tax abatement on those, which will be coming off next year. So they will come back on at full value. But as we went through the years, and I did not update it for this last year, but in 2017, the taxable value of turbine and turbine-related for Chandler Township is just under $123 million. Now, again, the $3 million figure, that's where they started off. You tax them at half, 1.5, and then they depreciate. In Huron County, what we collect through the millages on our tax bills my treasurer came on last election, and she just about had a heart attack. She called me up one day and she says, "What do I do with this check from Detroit Edison for the taxes?" And I says, "Well, you deposit it." But
Did you give her your check?
but she says, "Do you have any idea what the numbers are on this?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I've never seen a number that high on a check." So in what we collect, the millages that Chandler Township collects on that 122 million, this is back in 2017, medical care received 60,000. Transit Authority, 24,000. Senior citizens, 30,000. County operating, 528,000. County roads, we have a one mil for county roads in Huron County, 120,000. The veterans, 9,000. Getting to my township, our now I even forgot the number, 1.18 or something like that we receive for operating, brought into our township 143,000. One of the things that we implemented 3 years ago, as that came into effect, we decided to offer our residents garbage pickup free of charge, so that all of our residents in our township take advantage or are given that opportunity. Emergency services, again for the township, we have three fire departments that we pay standby to, plus 2 ambulance services, brought in 18,000. Township roads, we've always had 6 mills levied in as long as I've been on, for 30 years. That 6 mills has always been in place, and we were to the point of some of our older blacktop roads back 10 years ago. We're getting to the point that they needed some serious work done on them, and we're considering possibility of having to take some of them back to grind them up and just take them back to a ground up road. With the turbines coming in, just the turbine money that was brought in on that 6 mills, $723,000. That is, as Kevin mentioned, during the construction process, there was tubes fixed. There was tube replacement, I should say. There was reimbursement for damage to the roads. There was roads that they actually crushed, or restoned, I should say. But that, through the 6 years or 7 years that we went through the construction process, between John Deere and Detroit Edison, there was almost $1 million that they spent for road improvements or replacement in Huron County, over and above what we're talking, or in Chandler Township, over and above what we're talking about here. Huron ISD, 600,000. Lakers, while the turbines are exempt from the school operating, any voted millages, debt retirement and the like. Lakers School District, 147,000. Lakers Sinking Fund, another 120,000. And our local library received 96,000 in Pigeon. Again, this is just turbine-related dollars. It is dramatic what that has. Again, we are talking 87 turbines, so I mean it's a large number. But those are the numbers. I'm glad that Kevin, was able to put together those other sheets. That is what has been a slow process coming to get back to the people, to let them know it's not just the property owner that's receiving money. I mean, we are all receiving money. These are public funds. So it is very dramatic.
As Joanne asked, we did kind of skip right over zoning because, well, there's really never any zoning questions when it comes to a turbine, so. Gratiot, as I'm sure you know, has Greater Gratiot Development. They had a vision 12 years ago at least to collaborate, and that was in part of my original little bio that I put in. We do a lot of collaboration in Gratiot County, figuring it's easier to do it as a team than it is everybody individually. One of the processes we started was funded partially by MTA, partially by the Michigan Municipal League. We created a ground up, literally from the ground up, master plan for Gratiot County. It wasn't done by the county, it was done by all of the townships, cities, villages. And we worked together with one planner. And one of the visions that Greater Gratiot brought into that was we should think more globally than just picking one township and saying, how would you handle a Hemlock Semiconductor? How would you handle a Next Tier? What would you do? And we looked at it globally, and that's where the wind ordinance that we came from got its traction. I'm sure that we plagiarized the crap out of what Bill had done in the thumb, but it worked for us, and we got buy-in countywide, and they helped us understand before the money showed up that what's good for a township or a city in Gratiot is good for all of us, because we don't live in little islands. I live in St. Louis, I work in Midland. You folks live in Thomas Township and work in City of Saginaw. Wherever it is, it's good for the area, and that's a lot of the stuff that Great Lakes Bay has really brought to the forefront, that it's even bigger than a county. It's a region that makes things work. And looking to Lansing or looking to someone else to solve our problems just hasn't worked. I mean, we can't kid ourselves. We send that money and we get a little bit back at some point and say, well, that didn't work out so well. So with the master plan and the zoning, we set what we thought were reasonable setbacks, sound, for the times they worked fine. And we're 1,000 feet from an occupied building, either the time and a half of the 1.5 times the hub height, or 1,000 feet minimum, 55 decibels. But it seems to work. The corn generally is louder than that, and I can guarantee you the corn dryer or the tractor that's going by dragging a 80-row planter is louder than that turbine can ever be. And we kind of accept that in a rural district. But the zoning that our townships operate on, the Invenergy Group brought a proposal to us for a site review. We went through that process as in the ordinance. Looked at their map that they provided. Let me back up just to here. This is kind of what you get. And they kind of look at you from across the table. And Paul Funk sits over here, but you know, Paul's part of that DTE tribe that we got to know. And they say, well, here's what we want to do, and here's the general area. And if you look at that, you'll see that there's no leased land under the little black spot up in the top left. That's Shepherd. There's nothing in St. Louis down in the lower right, and just off the map below it is Elma. Because they don't want flicker, they don't want noise, they want the majority of everybody that can possibly be satisfied. In a perfect world, you'd put these up and nobody would care. And this is as close to perfect as you can get, you know, in rural Michigan to make that happen. And that's done partly by zoning, part by good corporate sponsorship when they come knocking on the door trying to do things. So the zoning wasn't a big deal. We held public hearings. We notified everybody within the wind park. And I mean, that's hundreds of letters that are going out by direct mail. Come to the public hearing. Pine River was fortunate because, again, if you remember the big map I showed you, we had turbines on one side of us already that had been there for years. We held a public hearing, and there were maybe 60 people showed up, probably the same size crowd that sits here right now. And we thought, oh my God, and I sat in the back of the room and I'm just sweating bullets going, here we go. And I had the first 4 people stood up, and I mean, they had legitimate questions. Will it scare the deer that are in the woods? Is that turbine too close to the woodlot that I own? Because the only reason I own it and pay taxes, I want to shoot a deer. And what about the birds? What about the eagles? I mean, that always comes up. The red lights were one of the questions. But they weren't people that were out to, to hang us. They just had honest to God questions. What are you doing with these? Had one of the 5 people that spoke out of this crowd of 60. Well, my husband works for DTE. He climbs these towers, and he didn't climb towers before they were here. And it pays us a pretty good income, and we kind of think they're not all bad. We live here, our kids are here, and we hope you let us expand. I had a planning commission that sat at a table like this, and we all have good planning commissions. And I tell you, I have a great planning commission, and it was kind of by chance, but you kind of, as you're appointing these people, I'm telling you, when this comes around, you'll wish you'd have paid more attention to who you were appointing that could handle a crowd of angry residents, because it takes a special person. We lucked out. We had great people sitting at the planning commission. We had a great attorney who specialized in understanding what the issues were going to be with wind. He wasn't the attorney that we used up until this project came along, who helped us analyze a contract with the road commission or something with a neighboring city to borrow a truck or whatever it was. Get experts on your side if this happens, because by the time you realize you should have had an attorney, it's way too late. It's like a snowball falling down a hill. So planning isn't tough. Planning is different. We plan for a lot more hazardous things than we do turbines. You can take any plant, any project, any prison, anything that we look at after it's all in and go, I don't know, we were all concerned to heck about it, but what's it really changed? Thanks.
Well, let's give this panel a round of applause. I'd just like to add my thanks to this panel, the first panel, and the good news is that these gentlemen will be around after if there are any other questions. I'd also like to say that we're here today because we at the Chamber of Commerce and Saginaw Future see a real opportunity in the future for both wind and solar because of our partners at DTE and Consumers Energy. They've been great partners to this community and to the Great Lakes Bay region, and we're looking forward to working with them, along with the communities that will embrace wind going forward. So thank you all for being here today, and have a great day.